Hello everyone. This video will focus on the highlights of Chapter 2, which is what we're focused on this week, concerning the self. And I think it's important to understand why we should even be concerned with the self when we're studying interpersonal communication. And one reason is because all of your communication starts within you. And it starts within your mind and is influenced by your perceptions of yourself before you're even influenced by the perceptions of others in terms of what you're communicating about. So all communication starts within us, and so it's important to understand where our communication patterns come from. So that's why we focus some on the self and the messages that people share with us. So we start with this idea of the particular others, people who are very important to us and the influence that they have on us as young children. And a lot of research concerning kind of self-identity, generation identification, kind of what generation you identify with, speaks to the idea that our self really begins to form very early in life, but mainly around the age of 9 and 10 years old. That's kind of what we remember, and when we're looking back on our lives, what's happening around that time in our families, in the world, with our friend groups around the age of 10 is very important to us and begins to kind of solidify our view of self in the world. So the people that you're around during that time in your life will have great influence on you. So what people tell us is important to us, and one way that we receive information through people is through direct definition. And this is the communication that tells us who we are, the labels that we're given. And I know that labels can have a negative connotation, but we need labels. Labels help us to organize. The perception process involves us focusing on something that's important to us, trying to organize that in some way in our mind so that it makes sense to us, and then we communicate that out to the world. Well, the labels help us to figure that out. We have labels for everything. A good friend. We know what that looks like in our life, and so when we meet new people, we kind of use that construct of a new friend that we have a label for to see, is this person fit into that category or not. So we just do this naturally. Stereotyping and things like that, the negative side of it comes into play because sometimes we're just not able to use those labels in a positive way for whatever reason. And so we do label, and we're given labels. You're a great athlete. You're so smart. You're so nice. You're such a people person. All of those kinds of things that we hear, or even some negative ones for sure, have a great impact on us. When I was 10 years old, I remember being in the 3rd grade and my math teacher, Miss Martin, telling me that math is just not my thing and that I'm not a person who can do math. And so that really stuck with me and influenced me in a lot of negative ways going forward, and was a struggle with me until I got to college and I found a professor who said, you're actually not too bad at this, and you do kind of get what you're doing, and we can work on this. And he did, and it's much better now. But for many, many, many years, I had this label that I wasn't good at math. Now, could I reject that? Yes, of course. But what I found was, as the math got harder and I didn't perform as well, and I didn't seek out help because, I just didn't want to get a tutor or anything like that, that kind of began to reinforce the negative label that was placed on me. So what people tell us and what we tell others is very important and very powerful. The reflected appraisal is our perception of another's view of us. So do we accept it or do we reject it? And we always have the power to reject it, but we do evaluate it, and we determine, how does this fit into what I know about myself and how I see myself? And that's called the looking glass self. And there's a video here that I'll post the link to that you can watch that talks about the looking glass self and the power of how we interpret information that other people are given to us. And then all of this forms our identity scripts. So what are our rules for living? What are our expectations? If we have these labels about ourselves, then what does that mean about the way that we interact with people? Does it mean that we are that we're confident? Does it mean that maybe we lack some confidence, as I did in math? What's the script? What's the expectation? My daughter's a very good tennis player, and she's been told that by a few people, and that's kind of become her script and her expectation, and the way she carries herself when she plays tennis and when she's at practice it's very obvious that she has been told, and it has been reinforced through her performance, that she's pretty good and that she's got some talent. And so there's an expectation there, and she carries herself according to that. So we have this feedback that we've been given, we reflect on it, and then we learn from it, and we learn how to behave, and we learn how to communicate. Okay, also concerning self, we form attachment styles, and I think this is very important to understanding how we communicate in relationships. And I have this great video here that I'll also post the link to about, about attachment styles and communication between varying attachment styles. And so what this research says is that your relationship with your caregivers as a child greatly influences how you communicate in relationships today. So a secure attachment is when you had a caregiver who was consistently, and that's the key, consistently loving and attentive towards you or towards the children, that you were around. A fearful attachment is when the caregiver is negative or rejecting of the child, and that creates this desire to please or to be in a relationship just because you're fearful of not being in one and the rejection that you might receive. Dismissive attachment, the caregiver is unavailable to the child growing up for whatever reason. Dismissive kind of has this term that they just don't care, but sometimes they can't be present, and that creates that dismissive perception. My mom was sick off and on a lot when I was younger, a preteen into my teenage years, and she actually passed away when I was 16. So that's definitely, she was unavailable at times just due to illness. And so sometimes this creates in people this avoidance of relationships because they may not have had that attachment or that, that relationship because the person wasn't present. And so they're a little bit more avoidant of relationships going forward. And I've certainly seen that, in my life. Sometimes especially early on, would put up walls and be like, well, why should I get close to you? No one is permanent. Because especially when you experience the death of a parent or a significant other early in life, a lot of times those feelings are there. They're present. And so we have to work through those. And then we have the anxious ambivalent style. This is the most complex because the caregiver of the child has communicated in all of these ways. They've been securely attached. There's been some fear there, and there's been some dismissal in these relationships. So I encourage you to, think about where some of your communication in relationships comes from, and take a look at this YouTube video because it will give you some insight into how the different attachment styles might communicate with one another, as adults, and which type of attachment to be in a relationship with other styles. And then finally, presenting and negotiating face. So face is that impression of the self that we want others to accept when we interact socially. So what do we want other people to think about us? And impression management is how we communicate our face to others because we want people to see us in a particular way. So how do you carry yourself? How do you impose upon other people, who you are and who you want them to see you as? And oftentimes we have what we call face saving. And so what this means is we are maybe in an embarrassing situation and we want to save face. And so we act in a certain way to deflect what's happening to us, or we see someone else who could be potentially walking into an embarrassing situation or a hard situation, and we want to help them save face. So we interject on their behalf and we say something, or we direct them in another way so that they avoid that situation. Or, if you're with a group of friends and someone says something and you can tell that it didn't go over very well with the group, you may make a joke about it, or you may jump in and try to explain more, or you may point out something positive because you're trying to help that person save face. And so face-saving strategies and understanding face is a lot about self-monitoring. How are we viewing ourselves when we're engaging with other people? And I think this understanding and understanding the influence that this impression management has on how people see us is critical to understanding our communication competence. How we see ourselves when we interact with other people definitely speaks to our ability to be a confident communicator. So these are just a few of the high points from Chapter 2, just kind of getting to look at yourself and where your communication comes from. And I'll be posting another video next week for our next chapter. So I hope you guys have a great weekend. Thank you.